We live in a world of screens. Tap to open, click to drag, pinch to zoom. It feels second nature, instinctive even. But it wasn't always this way. There was a time when computers didn't look like anything at all. No windows, no icons, no mouse. Just a blinking cursor waiting for cryptic commands. And then came a revolution, not in hardware, but in how we saw and touched computers. This is the story of the GUI, the Graphical User Interface, and how it quietly, radically reshaped the modern world. Ask most people what made computers accessible, and they might say cheaper hardware or the internet. But what really unlocked computers for the masses? It wasn't faster chips. It was something more human: pictures, buttons, menus, visual language. Before the GUI, computers spoke in code, cold, rigid syntax. To get anything done, you had to memorize commands like copy c:\data_report.txt_d:\archive. Get one character wrong? It wouldn't work. That's where the GUI comes in. Instead of typing commands, you click a folder. Instead of memorizing, you drag and drop. What once required training now became intuitive. But this revolution didn't begin in Silicon Valley. It began in a research lab that didn't even want the spotlight. In the 1970s, Xerox, yes, the photocopy company, quietly funded an experimental lab in Palo Alto, California. It was called Xerox PARC, and it became a playground for some of the brightest minds in computer science. Here, researchers weren't just improving computers, they were reimagining them. One of their biggest breakthroughs? A new way of interacting with machines. The desktop metaphor. Graphical windows. Icons for files. A small pointing device they called a mouse. They even built a working computer, the Xerox Alto, decades ahead of its time. But corporate leadership didn't see its potential. To them, it was just a costly R&D toy. So, they left it gathering dust, until a curious entrepreneur came to visit. In 1979, Steve Jobs visited Xerox PARC. He expected a demo of office software. Instead, he saw the future. What he witnessed, a GUI in action, blew his mind. He would later say, "It was like a veil had been lifted from my eyes." Jobs wasted no time. He rushed back to Apple and tasked his team with building a GUI-based computer. First came the Apple Lisa, expensive and flawed. But in 1984, they launched something iconic, the Apple Macintosh. It had a desktop. It had a mouse. It had windows and menus. For the first time, everyday people could use a computer without coding. The GUI wasn't just easier, it was inviting. And it sent a shockwave through the tech world. Meanwhile, over at Microsoft, things were changing too. Bill Gates had built an empire on MS-DOS, a command line system. But he saw the writing on the wall. In 1985, Microsoft released Windows 1.0, its first attempt at a graphical OS. It was clunky and slow, and critics weren't kind. But Microsoft was persistent. Version after version, Windows improved, and by the 1990s, it dominated the market. The GUI, once a niche experiment, had gone mainstream. And thanks to Microsoft's reach, it reached millions. Soon, the command line became a relic. People expected windows, menus, drag and drop. The GUI became the norm. The magic of the GUI wasn't just in its visuals. It was in its democratizing power. A child in Kenya could open a paint program. A retiree in Brazil could write a letter. A nurse in India could track patient records, all without needing to speak computer. The GUI turned machines into tools for everyone. It wasn't just a design change, it was a shift in who could access the digital world. Computers were no longer just for programmers. They were for people. Today, we barely think about it. We swipe, click, and scroll without a second thought. But the GUI, that invisible layer, is still what makes it all possible. Even now, it's evolving. In smartphones, we tap icons. In cars, we navigate touchscreens. In VR, we manipulate virtual spaces with gestures. The GUI started as a way to see the computer. But now, it's how the computer sees us. And to think, it all began with some researchers, a curious visitor, and a little pointing device called a mouse. So the next time you click an icon or drag a window, remember, you're part of a quiet revolution, one that turned lines of code into something beautifully human.